Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, which is the fifth one in the series. And today we have a group of experts to join us in talking about climate finance action in the dialogue post COP27. So we'll be spending a little bit time to share with you what will be the key away, especially for the finance sector with regard to climate finance and also its implication post-COP. And then we will be going into a very exciting debate with four colleagues of mine from the for team and then against team to discuss the statement whether the private sector financing can actually save Asia Pacific in its fast emerging energy transition to meet the net zero goals. So something very exciting to look forward to. We hope, of course, with the audience on the line to join us and share your views and questions through the Q&A box. So similar to the other house rules that you may have seen in the other ERM webinars, again, we encourage all of your participation. Considering the large amount of audience on the line, we actually have muted it, but we welcome you to post your questions anytime using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will be discussing the questions at the end of the presentation. And it's a very busy Friday afternoon, so this webinar will be recorded and published on ERM's APAC YouTube channel. Yes, we do have a YouTube channel, so please sign up and pay attention to the updates that you will get a copy of this presentation, similar to the other ones that we have run in the series of this week. We're also considering a diverse audience in the Asia Pacific context that we have enabled the English transcript feature. Simply click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and select show subtitle that you'll get the simultaneous translation as we speak. Last but not least, we really welcome your feedback. So please spend a little bit time to provide us your feedbacks through a survey at the end of the webinar. So let's warm up the audience a little bit. We do expect quite a nice show out today. It's this Friday afternoon. Maybe people want to have a bit fun time when we're going into the weekend. Just to get a sense of who are the audience on the line, can you please join us in the polling questions shown on the screen? Which sector does your organization present? We have quite a large number of varieties here showed up. So if we see participants from not only the finance sector, but maybe from the oil and gas, power, TMT manufacturing, or chemical farmer, agriculture, food and beverage. So please show us your polling and we'll provide a feedback who's on the line today with us. Thank you. All right. So this is quite interesting. We actually have a quite diverse group on the line with no group that is leading ahead of the others. We have a quite well-balanced participants from the finance, oil and gas, renewable, and also agriculture, food and beverage, chem farmer, TMT manufacturing, mining. I believe there's also some of the ERM colleagues on the line from the consultancy. Great. Thank you. Let's see whether, depending on which sector that you're from, then your view on this topic may change. So to open today's webinar, we are very glad to have invited Peter Rawlings, who is the global head of the finance sector in ERM. So a very good morning to you, Peter, based in London. So Peter will be sharing with us his and also our company views when it comes to COP27 takeaway on the topic of climate finance and its implications. So over to you, Peter. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Great. Thank you very much, Trista, and great to see a diverse audience and participants on the call. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. Before I jump into a few slides, I thought it might be worth just a kind of refresh and a recap of where climate finance has how it's progressed in recent years. Now, we've obviously had a very challenging few years with the pandemic in different parts of the world. There have been other factors, macroeconomic factors that have contributed. But I think one thing that we've seen as being a very strong and positive outcome has been the momentum that is built around the desire and the need to look at the energy transition and to decarbonize our economies. That momentum certainly has built over the last few years, and we have seen in multiple jurisdictions that the climate and the finance sector has been a prominent player in that transition. We've seen a lot of activity come out of key markets where both regulatory and voluntary initiatives are starting to really drive things. In the COP26 event that happened last year in Glasgow, we saw that the finance community really came together and brought about a concerted effort.
Sorry for the technical difficulty. We may have connection challenge with Peter. Can my co-panelists let me know whether you can
represent organizations?
Okay. Great. Sorry, Peter, we lost you just 5 seconds.
Now. Am I back again now?
Yeah, you're back again now.
Yeah,
no problem.
Apologies. So the finance sector has really played to date a very prominent role in building that momentum. And if we could move to the next slide, I think the COP27 really has provided a further platform to reinforce that. Now, ERM had a very strong presence at the event in Egypt. And we've summarized here, and those of you who may have joined some of our earlier webinars, you will have seen these kind of key outcomes that we've taken from COP. Ambition, action, and accountability. And I think those 3 outcomes really do play a prominent role when it comes to the finance sector, to climate finance, and the opportunity to really deliver. So if we go to the next slide and we focus on ambition, there is always a danger with these COP events where you have multiple stakeholders, multiple governments, you're trying to reach a level of consensus. I think often the expectations perhaps outweigh the actual on-the-ground progress that is achieved. But nonetheless, I think it's really important that we recognize the level of commitment, the number of pledges, initiatives, other activities that have come about through the COP process. On the right-hand side, I'm not going to try to take you through all of these, but you can see a whole range of various pledges, commitments, and activities that came about during COP27. And the finance sector is very key to the vast majority of these. You know, whether it's about adaptation and resilience, which was a key theme in COP27, the need, desire to mobilize finance to support the fact that there are already climate-related changes happening in our societies and communities. A desire to help look at finance, loss and damage. Nature and water had a very prominent part here, but also you had further backup of the commitments and mobilization of finance that were started at COP26, as well as other initiatives in earlier COPs. Now, of course, pledges and commitments only count for so much, and really the focus is on that action. And I think that's where we're starting to see, coming out of COP27, that transition and move to firm on the ground action. And so if we could move to the next slide, please. I think action is really the key part now. And with many of the organizations, the financial institutions that we work closely with, we're seeing now that action becoming the priority and focus. If you look at on this slide, we've captured some of the headlines, but importantly, what we now have is that the delivery of the committed levels of finance is starting to happen. Mobilization of this finance signing up of institutions to various initiatives such as Race to Zero is happening. And importantly, what we're also seeing is more and more organizations are recognizing that the desire to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C is now seen as a limit rather than a target or an aspiration. There was a lot of focus, as you can imagine, around Africa, given that the COP was based in Africa. But I think its application to Asia Pacific is equally as important, because there was a recognition of the importance and prioritization of those developing economies where further support is needed. And you've also started to see on the ground activity around building out project pipelines. So how to make projects finance ready, how to attract investors to different kinds of projects, whether they're linked to resilience, whether they're linked to energy transition, whether they're linked to direct decarbonisation. So much of this is still in the early stages, but as we see, more and more organisations are now actively starting to look at their own businesses, their own influence through the finance they provide and support, and they're actively putting in place roadmaps, action plans to deliver on their own carbon and energy transition targets, whether that's net zero over a defined period or its interim steps to decarbonize, to transition away from the more carbon intensive energy and other activities. But the action is only effective if the organizations committing to that action are then very clear on the progress they're making. And so if we, excuse me, if we could move to the next slide, please. This is perhaps what we see as one of the most important set of outcomes that the COP event highlighted, but we would really encourage all organizations that we work with to really embrace and develop the ability and the focus around accountability. There is a lot of scrutiny and focus on all of business, whatever sector you may be in. And that scrutiny is around the commitments you make, but demonstrating that you have a pathway towards those commitments and that you are transparent in the progress you are making. Demonstrating the impact you're having, transparency on the progress are critical to that credibility and trust piece. Now, from the finance sector side of things, you can see, for example, on the right-hand side of this slide, there are a whole series of initiatives. Many of these were set up, before COP27, Net Zero Asset Managers, Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, etc. These are initiatives that are bringing together financial players to both ensure that the commitments that have been made are being actioned, but also to hold these organizations accountable in terms of the progress they're making and the commitments they're making. Now, of course, many of these finance organizations are supporting the sectors and organizations that you all work in, whether it is oil and gas, power, agriculture, etc. Many of those sectors that you all shared at the beginning of the call. And so this collective action, this collective ability to demonstrate progress is really quite key. And so if I'm to wrap up my kind of quick introduction here, I think COP27 was, it didn't meet perhaps the elevated expectations that tend to come out of COPs. But what I think we did see is continued progress on prior commitments of previous COPs. I think we've seen the even more prominent and essential role that the finance sector has to play. But what we're also now seeing is this move away from pledges and commitments to actual on the ground action. And there are many organizations, NGOs. You may have seen one of the commitments that came out of COP was this concept of data explorers, which basically means that there are going to be focused efforts on tracking the progress of those organizations that make commitments. And I think that desire for transparency in order to build credibility and trust is there. So I am an eternal optimist. I know we still have a lot to do, but I felt positive in terms of COP. Yes, there's still a lot of work to do. Yes, there are still gaps that need to be addressed. But I do believe we've got a significant mobilization of the global, both finance community as well as the broader business community to drive decarbonization, drive the energy transition. We still need governmental policy enablers, and I know we're going to be discussing or debating that shortly, but I do think there is progress there, and we've got a direction of travel that we are now committed to, and it's now about moving on to that direction and delivering on those commitments. So maybe I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I hear the key takeaway is a few, keywords: accountability, transparency, tracking progress. I think that is very nice to set our mini fireside chat before we open for the debate team to come in. So I think so my first question to you is that COP27 is largely also known as the implementation COP. And
Yeah.
when it comes to the finance sector implementation, we know that the market in Europe is much more ahead of Asia Pacific. So when it comes to how to demonstrate accountability, showing progress and transparency, aside from organizations playing pledges and signing on, organizations and initiative, or, sometimes we even say that there's a potential of labeling and even on the edge of greenwashing, saying that we now become part of that. So where do you think some of the Asia Pacific finance institutes can actually learn from their peers in the European market in terms of the actions that they have demonstrated at the back of 26 and now moving on with the momentum into 27 that you think that is worth sharing for the APAC audience?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important to remember that a decarbonization commitment, a progression to the end, a transition is going to take time. There are no immediate short-term fixes. Now, perhaps where Europe has had the advantage or the earlier start than markets like Asia Pacific is that some of the policy frameworks, some of the transitions have already happened, but sometimes not necessarily for the reasons that we explained. Already Europe, for example, is less reliant, for example, on coal than perhaps parts of Asia. Now, some of those decisions actually happened for political and economic reasons many years ago. They weren't necessarily driven by the climate-related debate that we face. So there are policy instruments, there are already investments into alternative technologies that have already happened. But I don't believe that should stop any organizations, wherever in the world they are, from being able to take clear step-by-step action to move forward. And if we think of the framework for how to look at decarbonization and moving towards energy transition, I think it's so important to have a very clear benchmark, i.e., what is your greenhouse gas inventory and footprint? What are the key contributors to your emissions profile? It is also then, appropriate to perhaps benchmark and consider where, from an industry perspective, you stand and what might that be telling you. That collectively can then inform what your ambition may be. What is the time frame over which you can realistically be looking at that transition and decarbonisation. And then there are always going to be immediate actions that can be taken, whether it's related to efficiency of process, energy efficiency and activity. Maybe it is simple transition steps. Some of the bigger, harder to abate steps will rely on the right policy environments, the right scaling up of technologies, etc. And I think, you know, we give a lot of advice to clients we work for around those policy environments, around the readiness and the scalability of technologies. And yes, they're not ready necessarily today, but they can certainly be built into your thinking over, you know, 10, 15, 20-year time horizons. So I think there are lessons learned, but I think there are also, you know, clear-cut actions that can be taken now that are going to be beneficial.
Thank you. What I like what you share is that you actually did not mention one word, which is happening quite a lot in Asia Pacific, and that's disclosure. So what we have learned from Peter in the EMEA market is that understanding your baseline, right? What is your carbon intensity with your emission now? And then comparing across to the peer, then you can say what will be the feasible but ambitious enough target that you should set. And then considering what will be the available technology development and policy for you to say, how am I going to do that? And disclosure, that is similar in Asia Pacific or globally, that is one of the tools and mechanisms that one should use to demonstrate transparency, but is not only focusing on just for disclosure to demonstrate that what I do is the how, right?
Absolutely. And I think disclosure is important, but obviously you need to have the confidence in your own data and your own position before you move to that disclosure.
Great.
The importance is you need disclosure at a point in time to demonstrate and build that credibility and trust.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Conscious of time, let me ask you a very quick question. How would you define energy transition? What would be a fund if they come to you? Because we get this question quite often, say, hey, we're setting a fund that we want to focus on energy transition. Is it brown to green? Is it only green? Or is there actually a thing of green? Can I deploy capital into a more energy intense sector, knowing that the emission will go up, spike a little bit before it actually comes down? Is there a global agreement or sentiment, or what's your personal view about that? What is energy transition fund?
Yeah, no, that's getting right to the heart of this whole topic. And there are multiple definitions of energy transition. You think of phrases like decarbonization, sustainability, whatever it may be. There are so many different variations of what does it mean. For me, and this is built on a lot of experience through the organizations and clients we work for globally, the most important word there is transition. And I think that is important because you have to recognize that decarbonization, net zero, or whatever aspiration you have cannot happen overnight. It is something that has to happen over a time frame that recognizes that we're changing businesses, we're changing the economy, we're changing the way things are done. And while the technological answers are out there, they're not necessarily at the stage of where they've been scaled, or there are the policy environments, etc., to allow them to be adopted today. So we do a lot of work globally with funds and investors, for example, who are still committed to and investing in different kinds of, you know, it might be oil, might be gas, etc. still. But they're working on transition plans that recognize the phasing down of these investments will happen over time. And what they're doing is looking at the balance of where will that displacement. So they might be in parallel investing in, for example, renewables or hydrogen or alternative technologies. We are also working with organizations who still have investments and commitments around coal. But again, there's an acknowledgement that that will, over time, need to change. There will need to be phasing. And so from our perspective, what we're seeing is it's that word transition. Yes, today you may still have carbon intensive activities, but at a point in the future, you are looking to how you phase and change that out. And I think that to me is the most important thing. It's step by step and recognizing it happens over time.
Thank you. There's no magic there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so really look, give us the patience and the time, but be very deliberately with the effort to focusing on transition. And I think this is very good setting the scene. And now maybe I'll welcome our debate team colleagues to switch on their camera. So when we're discussing this webinar, we actually thought what would be the format. And some of you may be familiar with presentations and roundtable discussion. But we thought what would be more amazing to bring to the audience when we have our colleagues from different countries representing in Asia Pacific to debate one single subject and have their views. So thank you for joining me for the fourth team that I have Tomita-san from Japan, and then also with Yavo from our Jakarta office. So they will be debating that, yes, private sector financing can actually save Asia Pacific in the fast emerging energy transition and meet net zero goals. And then on the other side of the table, we have the against team represented from Margie from our KL office and also Sam from Sydney. So as you can see that, or a lot of conversations has happened surrounding not just the COP, but overall that we know the role of private sector and public sector, the importance of that in this topic. But I think for Asia Pacific, in a very particular context, that we want to understand how our colleagues thinks the role of private sector can actually play in this. So the way we have set up today's debates, we have 2 rounds. So first of all, I'd like to hear from the audience your view. What do you think? Do you think are your side with the for team or you're with the against team? So please join me in the polling question. So again, the debate poll we have today throughout the webinar is that private sector financing can save Asia Pacific in the fast emerging energy transition to meet net zero goals. And as Peter has explained to us that his view or the ERM view when it comes to the energy transition, we focus the word on transition that with time and then the effort that the emission will phase down, but we need to be patient and allow the time that is needed to go through that. So let's hear from all of you on the line, whether you're with the for team or the against team. Aha, so the for team is lucky. 83% of the audience are with you. And that means Margie and Sam, you're going to have a very difficult uphill battle, but I'm very looking forward to hear from your view. So, okay, so we will have 2 rounds. Each team will have 2 minutes per speaker to deliberate their view. And then we will go to the rebuttal as the second round. And at the end of that, again, we will hear from the audience for your polling understanding whether the against team has gained your perspective and support and changing, moving the needle a little bit. All right. So with this, let's start from the round 1. Are we ready? Okay. All right. So for round 1, each side will have 4 minutes total. That means 2 per person to define the role of the private sector versus public sector financing and its drivers, risk, and actions that should be taken. So now, action on. Yavo, go first. For team. You're on mute, and that counts as the seconds.
Sorry. Thanks, Trista. Very, very pleased to be on this panel. So the question that you've asked, can private sector financing save APAC in the fast emerging energy transition to meet our net zero goals? It's a very pertinent question, and especially after hearing Peter and hearing yourself, and as we come out of COP27. So it begs the question, why private sector climate financing? So I just want to set the stage. That the reason why private sector climate financing is so crucial to financing the energy transition is that this needs to occur at a global level and also in the region, right? So APAC region, but all across globally. And The reason for this is that there is an immediate need for low carbon infrastructure, as well as strategic projects that are very vital to all countries, but countries in APAC. And they need to make this shift because all of us know climate change is happening. But to give weight to my argument, I want to throw some numbers out there. So according to the IMF, and the IFC, which is a part of the World Bank Group, there are about $3 trillion to $6 trillion that are needed across all sectors per year by 2050 to help fund this transition. But here's the problem, right? The actual financing is much lower. It's only $250 billion. Now that's private climate financing that is out there, and you compare this to the $210 trillion in financial assets that are out there across firms, which is roughly twice the size of the global GDP. So even if a fraction of this is used to solve climate change, which is now the world's most pressing problem, we would be in a very good place. Finally, I just want to end.
Okay, so thank you. We'll come back to you. And then now for the against team, Margie.
Thanks, Trista. Is private financing critical to energy transition and net zero? Of course it is. Is it alone enough to save APAC? Absolutely not. The debate statement today states that the private sector financing can save APAC in energy transition towards net zero. Our premise is that as critical as we recognize private financing to be, without the leadership of government and public sector funds, the region will not be able to achieve the required energy transition. And this position has in fact been publicly supported by major global bodies, including the International Energy Agency, the World Energy Council, and the World Resources Institute. So 3 key arguments on our side. Firstly, the speed and scale required of energy transition in APAC absolutely necessitates international level collaboration and national level policies. And there's no way private sector can do it alone, but in fact, governments and public sector will in fact increase the productivity of the deployment of private capital. Secondly, the transition to clean energy includes 2 facets: pushing new technologies, but also cleaning up existing sources of carbon emissions, where governments can come in very strongly. Thirdly, the role of government is critical in enabling a just transition. Saving APAC does not only entail the championing of feasible and profitable solutions. Saving APAC is ensuring that every person has the basic right of access to affordable energy. So if you believe, as I do, that the public sector has a fundamental role to play in energy transition, you must stand against this debate statement. Net zero is the moonshot of our generation, and no one sector will achieve this alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Against team, you may still have a few seconds. Anything to add?
Yes, so in this case, in terms of early stage technology adoption and the development of widespread transition infrastructure within the countries, that is where governments will come in extremely strongly. Now, we've seen the need for infrastructure development across mobility, across retrofits, for example, of existing power and IPP. And that's where very much our position is that government and public sector will not only be extremely critical, but will lead.
Thank you. Let's take a
Thank you very much, Trista.
Thank you. So back to the 4 team, Tomita-san, go.
Yes, now following Yawar's argument, public sector funds, of course, it's important, but it's not sufficient. So we are talking about the implementation phase. So that is the one that the private sector needs to be a driver, and it would and it should be the leading the energy transformation. And then the energy transformation, it's not the only time, the first time that we are facing that. We have faced the change oil to gas, and then starting the renewable. So we are like looking back 20 years ago, we never thought about the renewable energy to be that big, and then with the private sector hands, and then growing like that we are observing now. So all the steps that we had, public sector came first, doing the pilot project, then risk taker, private sector developer comes in a small scale later. And then after that, gradually with the public sector support that grows. And then it comes after 20 years, then we can see this. And then this time, energy transformation that we are in need, we cannot wait 20 years. This is something that we need to do now. And then we need to encourage, and then we to participate on the private sector finance that is necessary for this energy transformation. So all those like implementation phase that we are having, this is a message that we would like to emphasize, that the private sector accelerating the change. This is a role of a private sector, and then that is something that we need to push for the next phase that is coming now.
Thank you. You still have a few seconds. Anything to add?
Yep, this is something with the example that I will follow up with Yawer at the later to rebuttal.
The full team is very confident and graciously to pass a few seconds. So Sam, for you to wrap up for the against team for round one, go ahead, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, private capital is there, but we're taking a back seat and sitting on the sidelines at the moment and keeping our powder dry, because we're waiting for public capital to actually, and the policies to actually be put in place. Now, Asia is a bunch of different countries with different regulatory regimes. And in terms of this transition, it's an uneven start. Different sectors with, say the power industry, mobility, agriculture, they're all coming from different standing starts, and they're moving at different paces. And from a private capital point of view, it comes with different risks and different returns. It comes down to having those regulatory policies in place and the public monies actually going in there to actually mitigate those risks, so that we can actually get that level of return for the private sector money that we're investing. And it comes down to weighted average cost of capital at the end of the day. There was an IEA study that was done on utility scale solar PV projects across a number of countries, the US, Europe, China, and India. And it showed that in the USA, the weighted average cost of capital ranged between 2.6% to 5%. And in India, it ranged from 8.8% to 10%. Now, India is a riskier country, and so private capital will want a higher rate of return, but that money didn't actually go in there until those regulatory regimes and public money actually went in to actually help mitigate those risks. And until those supporting frameworks are in place, private equity will stand on the sidelines and ask for an appropriate rate of return. If they don't get it, they won't come in. So from our point of view, we can help put those mitigating structures and facilities together and help private equity get there. But we want to see the public monies go in first, and to demonstrate that the risks that we are perceiving are actually mitigated. So at the end of the day, private money is there to take the risk, but unless it's a well understood and mitigated risk.
Well taken. Okay, so well done, guys. It's a very exciting first round. Let's take a 30 seconds break. So let me summarize. For the full team, you said the scale of capital to deploy is purely too significant that we need private sector to scale it up. And then the ability for transformation that private sector can take has reference back in 20 years, but we don't have 20 years to take in this round of energy transition. And then against team argue that, it's not that we don't want to do that, but we need to have the regulator, the government, the maturity of technology, and then for the public finance to go in to support that, and then the private sector will play a key role, okay? So let's go into the rebuttal. So rebuttal, again, each team will have 4 minutes, 2 minutes each. So we go in the team pairs, right? So for the first group, we will have Yawo for 4 team, and then Margie for the against team. And then we'll rotate to Tomita-san for the 4 team, and then with Sam, rebuttal for the against team. So are we ready? Okay, so 4 team, Yawo, go.
Thanks, Trista. So I'm very happy with the points that are made by my colleagues, both for and against. I do want to say that government's role and the public sector's role is very, very important. They need to make sure that there is, regulatory guidance and, setting the standard. But this should be to incentivize private participation. So, so they can strengthen domestic, regional financial institutions. But all of this should be done to scale up private climate finance. And private institutions play a very, very central role because they provide this access to finance whereby you can scale up the adoption of climate investments. So this can be done. I mean, the government and the private sector can work together, through co-financing, public-private partnerships, by supporting public development banks and all of that. So I also want to bring to so what are the solutions? So we're talking about a lot of things, but we need to talk about how to price in the climate risk that is out there, right? So and this can be done best by private sector institutions when you have banks, when you have financial institutions, and then they price this in, because this is something that cannot be priced in by the government alone. So yeah, so to promote a more transparent market, you need to allow investors, private sector investors, to make these informed decisions across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Margie.
Thank you. And I appreciate my esteemed colleagues. Thank you very much for your points. I do believe that many of the points in the for team actually do support our position in the against team, and I appreciate that. So in terms of the agreement on the collaborative financing, and in fact, I must say I'm cheating a little bit. We got a little bit of help from the audience as well, who said that they believe that blended finance is the way to go, which is a very good point, where we do need government and public sector. So thank you very much. And I think, to address some of the points from the first round in terms of scale and the ability and the need to scale, I think we've seen success stories all the way from solar to wind, and many case studies where government has stepped in and in fact enabled those projects very early on in terms of really being able to take hold in the market to where we see they are today. And I think truly that is our position in terms of whether it is leading or supporting, that role of, as frustrating as it may be, the role of regulation and governments, in fact, is large. To another point that Peter had brought up earlier in his presentation, in terms of the patience required. And patient capital is not always the strong forte of the private sector. And that is oftentimes where we do need the involvement and in fact the champion of public finance in order to be able to enable the huge transition and transformation that we need to see in the market. Now, net zero goals are not far away, and I think the speed at which we need to arrive at that means that we don't have time for the market at the moment to figure out a feasible and profitable way forward, but we really need to take this forward as fast as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, seems both team are very polite. Neither of them use their 2 minutes. So let's try the second round. So you can share a bit more case studies in terms of the examples and innovative structures and tools that each side of you can argue in terms of tools and platforms to support your argument. That would be brilliant. So, okay. So back to the for team, Tomita-san. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. So, of course, I would love to see a lot of like a public sector participation support, but why I'm arguing the private sector needs to go fast. We need to have direction of the technology and then understanding the risk in this until the 2030. And then why the renewable energy development took more than 20 years for the private sector to take a lead. This is the understanding of the risk, the political risk, technological risk. Those things were very difficult to deal in the beginning. So we don't believe much now, but in the beginning, wind power, solar power, we are not confident about that economics of that, but now we are. So this is a thing that we need to understand, the balancing the risk, and then private sector and public sector taking those risks, public sector supporting those risks, and then public sector is the one to be innovative and then to accelerate. That is the until the 2030, we need to have an innovative one. And then we cannot wait the time that we had like a renewable energy, 10 years, 15 years, so that everybody have a confidence on technology and jump in. This is a thing that we need to have the private sector to jump in and then take a lead. So I believe, and then I would like to encourage those private sector participation, equity, finance, debt finance both to take a lead on that end. The risk assessment is much more things that we need to emphasize so that the private sector is confident to enter or be open to challenge all those like risks to be taken. So this is something that we need to see in this 10 years or less than 10 years until 2030. But that is something that the risk that we saw in the past energy transition, and then we need to accelerate, and we need to emphasize what made those like a transition slow in the past, and then what is the point that we can accelerate this time? So those like understanding of risks, balancing the risk, and taking the risk on the public sector side, private sector side, so that private funds can enter in the mass amount. So this is the thought that I would like to emphasize.
Thank you, Tomita-san. If nothing to add, last but not the least, Sam for Against Team. Thank you.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And thank you for the 4 team for agreeing with us that the public sector needs to take a lead in this, and to take that early first stage risk, and to actually help underwrite that risk so that the private funds do come in. From an example point of view, we recently had a wind farm in Australia close, and it was basically the private sector taking merchant risk. And this is one of the first projects where the private sector has actually taken merchant risk, but it was only on the basis that the Australian Green Public Bank actually financed the part of the project and actually help underwrite that project to financial close, so that it enabled the private sector to take on that merchant risk. But then, on the other side of that, in the past, with a lot of solar and wind being embraced by the private sector and coming in very quickly, we've also had a lot of market disruptions around the energy grid, and as a result, the marginal loss factors have been adjusted, and the projects have been derated, and private sector monies and investments have actually lost hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's purely due to poor planning on the public side, and from public infrastructure not being in place before the private projects going in there. So there are lessons to be learned on both sides. Private capital is not there to take that sort of policy risk. It's for public monies to do so. And if they can go in first and have those frameworks put in place so that the private monies can actually understand the risks they're taking, then they can properly price them. And also private money is not there for duration. We're basically there 3, 5, maybe 10 years max to get our market rate of return. It's for the public sector if they want to develop long-term policies to actually put their capital in place for the long term.
Thank you. So now both teams had the chance to provide their view and their rebuttal. So now we will reach the final portion of the debate, which is the closing statement. So each team will have 1 representative. If you want to support your teammate, go ahead, and total 2 minutes to present your view. So for this round, I will actually have the Against team to go first. So over to you, Against team.
Oh, geez. Oh, thanks for that. Look, in summarizing, look, the private money is there on the sidelines. We understand that there needs to be $275 trillion or something roughly between 7 and 7.5% of global GDP spent between now and 2050 to achieve the net zero. We're well and truly happy to do that as long as the frameworks are in place for our investments to be safe, in order for us to the disclosures and reporting frameworks are there in place for us to be able to identify the risks, to be able to compare the results in a transparent and honest manner, and also that we want to see the public sector honor their pledges and commitments and put their money in first, and to demonstrate to us what the path towards net zero looks like in a credible and profitable way, and private money will definitely be there to support.
Anything to add?
Add on to that, thank you, Sam, and my colleagues. I think this is extremely fruitful. Now, in terms of championing public support and public financing for in leading the way, especially in terms of the transition, if we look at the transition from all sides in terms of the participation of the market, I think there are some areas that have been brought up by my colleagues that might have more of an appetite for private sector financing. But in terms of other areas like, for example, infrastructure development, for example, wider participation, even within public financing of more and different funds, attraction of international funds into national shores in terms of very almost climate friendly policies, all that at the moment and beyond actually sits well within the government area of influence as well as jurisdiction. There's only so much that private capital can influence, and it is typically quite straightforward in terms of the benefits that are seen. And I think it's up to government to ensure that that's holistic and that is able to enable the rest of the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll get back to the poll and see how the against team has, whether they've gained some ground. Okay, so for closing statement, 4 team, go ahead.
Let me start off, Tomita-san. Thank you. A very good debate. I actually might poll for the against team, but I do want to add that so what does the private sector bring to the market and to the fight against climate change? So they bring innovative financing instruments. My colleague Tomita-san spoke about them as well. But what the private sector can do is that they can bring in price in climate risk. So they can bring in different instruments such as grants, loans, guarantees, equity for financing the transition, but also different bond instruments such as green bonds, green loans, first loss guarantees. And not only that, they can also help bring in these bankable projects that that are out there, but have a very high risk. So only the private sector can venture into this. And finally, before I hand it over to my colleague, I do want to say it's all about it's show me the money. So there's a lot of money out there in the private sector, held by banks, pension funds, investors, investment banks. We just need to make sure that the government can support us in using this private sector capital to fight the world's biggest problem, which is climate change. So thank you, and over to you, Tomita-san.
Thank you. So this is the 4 team, and then thank you, Sam, to say that the margin risk is being taken for the now those like a power sector. So this is something that I would like to emphasize. We are not, for example, hydrogen, ammonia, the new energy that we are talking. We are not talking about creating a totally new market. This is a combination of existing energy transforming gradually to 2050. So we are not talking about something new, everything different. No, we are talking about like gas and other sources to gradually change and transform, mix to that, and then using those like a private sector actions, business into that. So if it's additional like risks, so this is a thing that we need to consider, and a price like Yawar said, but this is something that the transformation from the private sector led entire energy market, and then gradually mixing in that with the new sources. So this is something that we have done, those like changes, we have done those like efforts to introduce the new source of energy. So continuously those innovative efforts, this is something that we need to do. And then the Asia dealt a lot.
Thank you
on
so much,
already.
Tomita-san.
Thank you.
All right. Brilliant. So I think for the last 20 minutes, the audience has shown us their support and wow with our 2 teams. So let's go into the final poll. So just a reminder, when we first started for the question, private sector financing can save Asia Pacific in a fast emerging and transition to net zero goals, we had 83% for the 4 team and then 17 for the against. So show us whether you have, the against team has changed your view, or you actually think the 4 team has gained leverage by demonstrating how the private sector can play this. So what I hear is that the 4 teams saying that this is nothing new, is business that's going, that we have done continuously effort, even though with the new infrastructure and energy, the ability for private sector to scale it out with the type of product is there. Against team saying that, yes, we hear you, but if the publics do not fulfill their commitment and demonstrate that they actually hold on their part of the bargain, private sector will not be able to go this because they actually have fiduciary duty to fulfill, and they're in this in a much shorter game. Let's hear from the audience whether we have changed the scale of the debate question after the amazing presentation on both sides. So let's get this poll result now. Thanks. Aha! Well, congratulate yourself for the against team that you have gained significant ground. The for team bit is still leading by 57%, but I think the argument is loud and clear. That the audience has shown their opinion. So Peter, if I may invite you to do a closing in terms of what you think the key takeaway the audience and our amazing colleagues have done here in answering this statement.
No, thank you. Well, firstly, what a hard act to follow. What a fantastic debate and some great arguments both ways. I found myself starting out for the for and then the against, and I moved that way and then back again. So I think my own decision changed right the way through that debate. So well done, everyone. That was fantastic. I guess, you know, and I think the close nature of the final scoring probably reflects where most of us sit. And that is, you know, I know we had a debate topic and we're coming at it, but really it's about a joint effort there. You know, we do need both public and finance working together, you know, public there to help upfront, as we heard, you know, help de-risk, help create the enabling environment, help to really create the format, the structures and the incentives to then mobilize the private sector. And as we heard also, you know, the role of private sector finance is so key given the scale, the volumes, the experience, the insights in order to deliver the infrastructure, the projects, the technologies and the needs. So I thought it was fantastic. I kept moving between the two myself. So some really good examples. I think there are, as we heard from a number of my colleagues, you know, some really interesting innovative instruments and structures that need to be coming into play. And I think many of those, you know, we heard from, I think there was some comments in the Q&A, the likes of blended finance and this kind of joining together of both of the marketplaces is really key. So my summary, what a great debate. Again, I said in my introduction, I'm an optimist. I still feel that is the way. I still believe there's a lot of concerted action that both private and public sector together can deliver. But at the end of the day, I think where the private sector has the role to play is the experience and the scale of finance needing. And you need the public piece to really help de-risk and create that enabling environment. So I've probably been as neutral as they come, and my closing statements is that it was a draw. Well done, everyone. I thought that was excellent.
Thank you, Peter. Indeed, my heart goes both sides. Great. So thank you so much for the amazing for teams and against team presenting that. So in summary, this is nothing that private sector or public sector can do on their own or government. One of the key focus on the COP26 is collaboration, and that is precisely the spirit of here. And ERM has been in the field working with different type of parties together in blended finance, public finance or private finance. And we've seen the movement of how this shift has coming. And in Asia Pacific, this is definitely stronger than ever with the appetite in infrastructure funds and renewable. For example, our Indian team supported one of the 4 bigger offtake of the renewable power just in this week, and our Korean team is seeing a lot of demand in infrastructure, city gas, and also waste management sector, just for the sake of how private finance can support this. So with this, we now have a few questions on the line coming from the audience. I'm so conscious of time here, so thank you for all of you that have joined us. The panelists will stay on the line to answer some questions. That if you want to stay online, feel free to join us. And just a reminder that this is a series of webinars that we are running. The last but not the least one of a very exciting topic about renewable offshore wind will be scheduled on next Monday. Feel free to join us as last one for our series. And for those of you who have to leave, thank you for so much and have a wonderful Friday and weekend. So let's spend a bit more time. The panelists have very graciously to agree to stay with me for another 10 minutes in case we have more questions to go through. So one of the questions, actually the first one is more like a statement, is that blended finance is the key. I think Margie has addressed that. And anything else to add?
No, I mean, my view is, as I think the panelists have shared, I think that these kind of instruments are critical. It's creating the enabling environment to really give the confidence and de-risk the private sector coming in. So no, I think I'm fully in agreement with that statement. Great.
The second question, actually, some of the debate has referred to the deployment of capital for the renewable power in the last 20 years. So the question is that how can governments structure their early stage support in a way that won't crowd out private capital soon after? So for example, should renewables start off with auctions instead of fixed subsidies? Any takers on that?
I'll go with a little bit of that discussion, because I understand that a lot of like long-term like a commitment is necessary for the private sector to come. And then some like a market type of approach, auctions and those like things may have a lot of like additional uncertainties. So those like things like auction that is very much of a market-based thing, and then special like a financial capability to understand, that is something that could come on the later stage. So this is something of understanding FIT type of a system is able to introduce by the public sector support, but once the private sector is able to take a risk, then the price will go down. So that is something that the bidding process was very much of the good process that we saw in a renewable energy introduction. So this is like a very much of the market-based auction could be a little bit later than the first type of bidding type of entrance.
So basically, the public or the government is to provide a sufficient infrastructure and a system for this, the mechanism to work, and then can change to different type of playbook and allow more participation. Thanks to Mita-san. All right, so we have one more question, which is actually a statement. I think this one is for us against team to pick up. So the statement was that the critical role of the public sector is to remove or at least reduce certain risk, most importantly, political risk. But this is more the role of government rather than the public finance. Public finance is just a means to show this government commitments and seriousness, which is important, yet not substantial. What's your view on that against team?
Yeah, I think that's, it's a very apt statement, obviously. And I think, you know, we didn't quite within the debate segregate between government and public sector financing. And I think, you know, the comment is absolutely spot on. So in terms of governments and really being able to create that environment that is not just feasible, but conducive for private sector participation, but also the channeling of funds towards, you know, potentially even guided areas of investment and you know, to that point though, on public sector finance, it's really very dependent, right? It really depends on even parts of the world that you're in, the different policies within each nation, the amount of public sector finance that's available within borders as well. So I think it's an apt statement, but not necessarily true across the board.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Margie. Yeah, Australia is a net capital importer country, so we rely on foreign investment to come in, and the role of government is to provide a stable investment environment so that the foreign funds do actually come in, and there's basically a free market for them to actually operate in, and the market has to be not only free but transparent. And when that mechanism doesn't work, then you've got a general reticence of foreign investment and foreign capital flowing in. But what we're seeing in Australia with electricity prices, is that the government's now talking about price caps and reserving gas on the East Coast, and that's going to make private capital very nervous, because you're not really allowing supply demand to actually operate in a free market, and you're stepping in to try and regulate that, and that's not really the role of government. Government's there to set up the frameworks to enable the long-term private capital to come in to invest in that safe, stable environment.
Can I just add on to Sam? So I agree with both their statements, Margie and Sam. But I do want to say that throughout this debate, you must understand that we have to now price in climate risk. So once we start doing this, once both the government and the private sector start pricing this in, it will automatically look towards more climate financing, which is our ultimate goal. So that's,
Thank you.
I just want to add that.
So that gets back to what Peter has shared with us in some of the lessons, actions that company can take, understanding your baseline, right? So once you have understanding your baseline, taken the price of climate change, including physical risk and transitional risk, into your investment decisions, and then have a tangible plan, but yet ambitious enough with time frame to track that, this is how transition will happen. So very much thank you for my colleagues, the great panelists, and Peter joining us very early in the morning from London. All great things have to come to an end. So with this, I thank all of you joining us in the wonderful Friday afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you on Monday, and have a nice weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.